Hi, how's it going? Hello, everyone. 4 or 5 years ago, it seemed like a lot of people were talking about the DBX 286s channel strip. I even added it to one of my wish lists online back then. Recently, I noticed it still sitting there in that list, and it occurred to me that I hadn't seen or heard very much about it in years. It was over 25% off at the time, so I decided to finally get one. If you're live streaming or if you're recording a podcast where your voice ends up getting mixed into the same track as others, it may be impractical or even impossible to do any post-processing. Or it may simply be the case that you want to minimize your post-processing. In any of those cases, a channel strip like this might be just the ticket for you. Assuming, of course, that you actually want or need to add any processing. A channel strip like this allows you to add processing to the signal path in real time. And even with the price increases of the 286s over the last few years, it still seems to be one of the best value options for the features it provides. It has a preamp with 60 dB of gain, a high-pass filter, a compressor, a dual-band EQ, a de-esser, and a noise gate. It has a built-in power supply and seems to have good build quality, though I can't speak to long-term reliability as I only just got mine. I will say that it annoyingly does not have a power switch. The only alternative that I'm personally aware of that isn't far more expensive is a channel strip Behringer released not too long ago, and it lists almost identical specs and features to the 286s. It's seriously either a blatant copy or they are getting it from the same factory and had them just tweak the look slightly. However, the main difference is that the Behringer actually has a USB audio interface built in. And it's also far less expensive, but this video isn't about that one because I don't have one. As handy as a channel strip like this can be, my guess is that most people really don't need one. A lot of creators are probably recording their audio and editing it later, and in that case you can add all of the processing and more with an audio editor. In fact, it's arguably safer to add processing after recording, if possible. Baking the processing into your recording may save you time editing, but if you end up wanting to change it later, it might be difficult if not impossible. For instance, you can add a compressor and a noise gate in post, but you can't take it away after it has already been added to the recording by a channel strip like this. But what about the added gain that it provides? What if you're using a dynamic microphone and want the added gain that a channel strip like this provides? I've seen stuff like this recommended for people who are planning to use an SM7B. In fact, I saw where one person claimed that they had their SM7B running through a Cloudlifter, then into the DBX 286s, and then into their audio interface. 3 preamp stages. If you are editing your audio after the fact anyway, you could just boost the levels slightly in post if it would end up a touch too quiet. But what about noise? Is there a meaningful benefit to all the extra gain? Modern USB audio interfaces tend to have very low noise preamps. I say tend to because there are exceptions out there. And there are actually mics which are far less sensitive than even the SM7B. But I suspect that for something like the SM7B, you probably don't need more than what a decent USB audio interface provides. Right now, I'm recording into my laptop via a Universal Audio Volt 176. The preamps are the same as in the Volt 1, which is $140. So it's a fine interface, but it's nothing particularly special. And by that I just mean that there are any number of audio interfaces out there in the same price range that would perform just as well. I currently have an SM7B plugged directly into the interface, and I have the gain maxed out. Maybe now you are cranking the volume to scrutinize the quiet moments, and if so, you can probably hear some noise. Don't worry, I will provide a few moments of quiet from each setup so that you can more easily compare them. But up to now in this video, before you were trying to hear it, did you notice any noise? I've been recording with this setup for the whole video so far. No processing applied, no noise reduction. Has it been good enough for the average YouTube video or podcast? Personally, I think so. But what do you think? It will be interesting to see if adding the additional 85 dB of gain from a Cloudlifter and the 286s makes a significant difference. First, for comparison, I've added the DBX 286s to the chain. The SM7B is connected to the 286 and the output of that is running to the interface. And without cranking the volume and scrutinizing the sound, is there a noticeable difference? And even if you do crank the volume to scrutinize the sound, is it an improvement? And just so you know, I did kind of play with the balance of gain between the two to get not only good output levels, but to get the lowest noise floor that I could. So I am giving it a fair shake here. All right, now I've got the whole setup going here. I have the SM7B plugged into the Cloudlifter. The Cloudlifter is going to the 286S, and the 286S is going to the 176 audio interface. I haven't been using any of the processing on the 286 during any of this, and I have the compressor in vintage mode on the 176 turned off for all of this testing as well. And I have good quality cables at all parts of the chain. So is there an improvement? This setup seems a bit silly to me, but there are folks out there who have been convinced that you need a setup like this in order to get good results out of the SM7B. And if I were to pop back to the SM7B connected directly to the 176, is it a noticeable difference? And switching back to the SM7B to Cloudlifter to 286 to 176 chain, is there a difference large enough to justify this setup versus the interface by itself? Now, to really drive this point home, I'm going to give you a little bit of silence from each setup so you can better compare the noise floor. Bear in mind, you may hear a bit of ambient sound creeping in as well. My sound booth is fairly well treated, but it's not soundproof. But overall, if you're hearing anything, it's probably going to be the general noise floor of the setup here because it is pretty quiet in here today. After hearing the setups, did we gain, no pun intended, enough benefit from all this extra equipment to be worth the extra effort and expense? I would say no. From listening back myself, I would say the noise floor setup of this whole setup is about the same as the audio interface by itself, and with just the 286 and the audio interface, I think the noise floor was actually a tiny bit worse. And that could just be that the fact that the preamp in the 286S isn't quite as clean as the interface in the Volt 176. So adding it to the chain doesn't really help you out much. Granted, if you want the real-time processing that the 286 offers, that's another story. And there could even be some cases where the extra gain is useful, regardless of the noise floor. But if your main concern is simply getting a low-noise recording with a dynamic microphone, you really don't need anything more than a decent audio interface. If you do have an audio interface with a lot of self-noise, then you probably would notice an improvement from a setup like this, or even from a Cloudlifter by itself. But you can get an interface with good preamps for less than the price of a Cloudlifter. And this Volt 176 interface is far less than the price of a DBX 286s, and it has a compressor built in. Granted, it's not adjustable at all like the one on the 286 is, and the 286 offers other processing. But the point is, as handy as a channel strip can be, most people probably don't need one, even if you want to use an SM7B. If you want to use a Cloudlifter or a channel strip or both, or if you already do, I'm not going to say you're wrong. Whatever works for you, that's great. But if you're wondering whether or not you need that stuff in order to use a dynamic microphone, I would say no. So hopefully these tests have helped you make your decision one way or another. And if you have any questions, let me know. As always, thanks for watching. Take care.